Tēnā koutou katoa, taloha ni, taloha lava, salam alaikum. Ko Linda Naitaho, ko te principal of Glenview School in Cannons Creek, Porirua East. First I call upon my colleague and Deputy Principal Matu Lester to open for us with karakia. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou, I'm the chairman karakia person this morning. Children, get to the karakia tātou, koru, e kia nā itia supporting our principal this morning, Mother Glenview, and we're proud to also be given an opportunity to perform in such a beautiful venue. So good luck for the rest of the day.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. On behalf of the Aotearoa Educators Collective, a warm welcome to you all and thank you for joining us this morning. We especially thank Matua Lawrence Shunan for hosting us here in this impressive space. And we invite you, Lawrence, to say a few words. Kia ora.
Kia ora te whānau, ko Lawrence Shunan tuku ingoa. I have the incredible honour of hosting the launch of this report, Beyond Capacity, by the Aotearoa Educators Collective and Uplift. Can I just say that I am actually in awe. It's actually my honor to be standing here and hosting this event because I'm absolutely in awe of all of you and the collective wisdom that you bring to this space and also to education in Aotearoa. It's one of the things that we say all the time, and I'm a firm believer of that. At the end of the day, us as politicians, we come and go, governments come and go, ministers come and go, but the work that you do and the organizations and the communities that you represent are enduring. And I think that we must never lose sight of that, of the contribution that all of you bring to education every day. So I want to thank you for that. So in terms of the reports of today, well, like I mentioned, we're launching a report Beyond Capacity, Learning Support in Crisis. Just a couple of key things I'm sure that Dr. Sarah Aino will be talking about as well, is the fact that we have seen in this report, and we know from the front line and from the things that all of you deal with every day, that the evidence is clear that learning support has not been well-resourced, have not been well-funded by successive governments for decades. And there is this need for genuine change. When we're seeing that 16 to 20% of our tamariki, of our akona, are neurodivergent, we have increasing number of students, with needs, with highest needs, as stressed in the highest needs report, which have just disappeared into thin air. But we know that only 1.1%, for example, are eligible for ORS funding. And for some of the things, some of the parents and communities I've been working with, there's children that Tamariki got high needs, but they have already been told they're not going to be eligible for ORS funding. And these are Tamariki who can't even stand up on their own, but they're not eligible. So this is, it just shows the complexity of the situation and what we are dealing with. So what we are wanting to see, and one of the reasons we're launching this before the budget, is we are seeing as a government that will do what it takes to actually make these little systematic changes, not cosmetic changes, and not skirting around the issue and putting things down just to make numbers look pretty, as opposed to genuinely addressing the needs of our communities. And I think what really highlights, and we're hopeful for the budget, but what we have seen so far that has been highlighted, for example, is the cancellation of the 33 pay equity claims, which I know, and shout out to NZDI and the negotiation team for support staff negotiation, that I know has just vanished, and just disappeared, and now we're starting from square one. So these are the things that are currently also facing us as challenges. But as the Greens, we do want to see an education system where everyone has a sense of belonging. We talk about equity, but what if we imagine a system that doesn't have the systemic barrier there in the first place? What would that look like, where people don't have to ask for help? The help is there to begin with. That's our vision, and we hope that our green budget, when we're talking about expanding the school lunch program, nationalizing our ECE, it's just one step towards achieving that particular vision. But with that being said, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I want to thank AEC and also Uplifted for putting together this report. Thank you, Linda, for being the MC. Thank you, Sarah, for being one of the speakers, and also being the person who pulled together all of this report. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. But I actually do have a official role here, which is to go through the really exciting health and safety requirements. For those of you in the event of a fire, and this is for our, and also thank you to amazing Tamariki and Akunga from Glenville School. Thank you so much for your work. They were amazing, and all of you are so beautiful. But in the event of fire, this is for everyone. Should a fire alarm sound, please evacuate the venue by the same route you entered, by the nearest safe exit. Please follow the directions of the fire wardens and security staff. The evacuation point is Bolger Park at the rear of the Parliament. I'm being disoriented. Rear, I think is that way. For medical emergency, if there is a medical emergency, counterproductively, do not call 111. Please inform security or venue immediately, and they will be able to deal with this. In the event of an earthquake, drop, cover, and hold. Please keep away from windows and all other obvious hazards, and please remain in the venue until you're given other instructions. This is actually an incredibly safe building, so hopefully everyone will be safe inside. If you are a visitor, please make sure that you do have your visitor's badge on at all times. The security will check that. The toilets for the LCC is downstairs by the main entrance where you entered, and smoking is not allowed anywhere in Parliament buildings, but if you are a smoker or vapor, you are more than welcome to do that outside the main gates on either Molesworth or outside the main gates of Museum Street. And lastly, please try to put your phone on, turn your phone off, if not put it on silent or vibrate, so that way it doesn't distract our speakers. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Linda. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. Thank you also to Carmen Class from Glenview School for your lovely singing, and to Fucks and to Fire. And you're going to choose a moment to sneak out quietly, because there may be just an hour of reading, writing and maths you have to get through before 3 o'clock. So whether you're educators, students or whānau, members of Parliament or media or representatives of professional or educational bodies or unions, we thank you for your interest in this kaupapa. I know that many of you care deeply about learning support and education. This report is the first publication by Uplift Ed, which is the research arm of the Aotearoa Educators Collective. The AEC is an umbrella collective of academics, principals and teachers who are passionate about progressing education in Aotearoa so that all mokopuna succeed. We are not aligned to any political party, but aim to contribute to mainstream debate informed by research and our professional experience in education. I see a number of principals here today, and you know, as I do, that our principal colleagues throughout Aotearoa New Zealand identify learning support as their #1 concern and stressor. A stressor not just due to the financial challenges, and personally I can say that over the last few years my own school has spent an average of 75% on classroom support staff, our teacher aides, our kaiarahi, from 75% of our operational funds. We anticipate an announcement about learning support in Thursday's budget, and together with parents and whānau and all educators, we wait with a bated breath. Today we are excited to launch this report, Beyond Capacity Learning Support in Crisis, and it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sarah Aiono to share it with you. Sarah is the CEO and co-director of Longworth Education, an internationally recognised advocate for play pedagogy. As a former classroom teacher, special education advisor and resource teacher of learning and behaviour, researcher, author and speaker, Sarah is known for combining deep educational insight with practical, actionable strategies. Thank you, Sarah.
Kia ora koutou. Inga mana, inga reo, inga kāranga ngā maha whakarau I ka mai raro I te tuanui o tēnei whare, tēnā tātou. Tū mai rā te maunga tapu, whakaruru ana, I te rohi nei. Kia ana reki ko te awa riri ana he whānau ai ki te hau kainga nei. Ki te whare e tū nei, tū tonu. Ki ngā tini mati o te wā, moi mai rā e oki. Ko ki mai ki a tātou te hunga ora, ko hui mai ki te whakamana I te kaupapa o te rā nei. Ko te mana ko nui, kia whai wārangatanga tātou hei hāpai I o tātou tamariki. E tipu ana hau I raro I te maunga rongo kāpo, I te taha o te awa, toki. E noho ana hau hei ahuriri ko Sarah Aiono tōku nōna reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you very much for having me here today to share this report. It is both a professional and personal privilege to be able to share what I would have to say is one of the most depressing forms of research I've ever done so far. Why this report? What I wanted to share is we as a collective, we were talking as a passionate group of people about all the issues that are happening in education at the moment, and this was certainly an issue that kept coming to the fore. You know, where are we at with learning support? All of us in the AEC have boots on the ground. We're in classrooms, we're seeing what's happening, we're speaking with teachers, we're speaking with whānau, and this was something that was coming through so clearly as a really resounding issue. Rather than going down the same route that we've had for the last 25 years of reviews, what we decided on was that we really wanted to capture those unheard voices. Often when we have reviews, it's at a highbrow level, it's at an academic level, and it doesn't really capture the heart that we're talking about right now when it comes to people's lived experiences. So what we wanted to do was really to amplify those unheard voices, particularly educators navigating a really fragmented system, whānau battling bureaucracy, and our mokopuna whose right to equitable education is being compromised. We know that the system's at breaking point, and what we saw in this report was that the gap between the educational policy rhetoric and daily realities in schools is widening. We've had decades of incremental reform, but that's failed to adequately address deep-rooted inequities in learning support. And we're in a critical time. It really does feel, and certainly my experience in the special education sector, it really feels as bad as it's ever been. And we're at a critical juncture now because the current model is unsustainable, educators and students are struggling, and the pressures on the system are absolutely intensifying. So we need immediate, bold and principled reform that is not optional, it's essential. So this this report synthesises existing research really with fresh insights from recent stakeholders, and it provides a really comprehensive view that moves beyond statistics, numbers, to human experiences and really urgent realities. It's a call to action. It's challenging decision makers to move from recognition of problem to transformative policy action. So let's have a look at the snapshot of that current reality. As you will have heard, the statistics are that around 15 to 20% of our learners are estimated to be neurodivergent. That's just one area of learning support, is the neurodivergent area. and of that, only 6 to 7% receive funded learning support. As Lawrence said, we're hearing about 1.1% qualify for the OARS funding, ongoing resourcing scheme, so we have thousands without essential support, and these are our most needy children. We're talking not just accessing curriculum, we're talking physical health as well. Of course, represented within those numbers inequitably are Māori and Pacifica and our rural learners. They face disproportionate barriers and inadequate support. There is record that 41% of neurodivergent children aged 5 to 11 have no record of receiving ministry-funded support at all. Our current funding models are fragmented. We have multiple schemes, unclear processes. We have reactive funding. Resources come too late after significant challenges arise, and it's unpredictable. Our schools cannot strategically plan for staffing, for support, because they just don't know when the money is going to come, if at all. And then of course we have our critical workforce shortages as well. We've got chronic shortage of specialists, psychologists, speech language therapists, occupational therapists. If you're lucky to get funding, then that doesn't mean you get the specialist. We have a high turnover and casualisation of teacher aides, which leads obviously to instability and lack of continuity. And then we throw in the pay equity issue on top of that, which this report was done before that. And then finally, because of all of that, our learners face ongoing exclusion, disengagement and unmet need. And our educators are burnt out. We've got widespread burnout, we've got exhaustion, we've got teachers, great teachers, who are overwhelmed due to systemic pressures. So I wanted to just break down a little bit of the themes that came through in this report. This is just an overview of what we came to. The report, the research that we conducted was a series of interviews of people representative in the sector, crossing a whole wide range of people who work within the learning support sector. And from that we took all that interview data and we compounded it into some frequent themes, common themes that came through from those discussions. Everyone that participated was asked the same questions, and not so surprisingly, we got very much similar answers from everyone involved. So we're going to talk through these themes over the next few slides, just to be able to break them down a little bit more. So firstly, one of the key themes that came through was a lack of support for schools. So we're seeing a significant difficulty recruiting and retaining really qualified support staff. So as I said, we've got that casualised employment. Student-linked contracts. So if a student attracts funding, that student no longer is there, that support worker then loses their job as well. So we have high staff turnover. And then on top of that, rural and high-need schools face severe staffing shortages as well. So again, if you're in a rural school and you manage to get hours for teacher aides, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to secure a teacher aide, because if they're only funded for an hour a day, and you've got to travel an hour and a half to get to the school to do an hour a day, then it's really hard to attract people to that role. We have fragmented and reactive funding. So the funding systems are overly bureaucratic at the moment, they're inconsistent and unpredictable. They're so bureaucratic that many of the principals I spoke to said it's just not worth filling in the paperwork for what we're likely to get back. The hours we'll put in to fill that paperwork in is not going to equate to the hours that we need. So we're seeing schools wait too long for necessary funding approvals, and that causes obviously learner disengagement and escalation of needs because our learners are without support. And by the time some of that funding comes through, you'll see a quote there, it's the 9th attempt for OARS funding at the end of the year 8 year, just as that student's about to go into high school. And the teacher said to me, look, I'm so pleased they've got it, but we've had this child for 2 years without support, and we've done all the hard work. Operational budgets, as you heard from Linda, are frequently diverted to cover urgent learning support shortfalls. There's a crisis reaction rather than early intervention. So it's always in a state of crisis rather than being proactive and getting in early to avert a crisis. Schools are constantly in firefight mode and are unable to plan strategically or sustainably. So this theme particularly, in summary, says really that the current funding and resourcing practices really severely undermine schools' capacity to meet diverse learner needs, and it places immense pressure on educators in creating systemic vulnerabilities. The next theme that we had was our honouring Te and this was a really very clear, resounding message from the people that were a part of this research. The question that they were asked was, how do the current learning support systems reflect a Te honouring approach? And every single person said they don't. There is nowhere in there for Te Tiriti to be represented in any decision making, any support for whānau, any funding operations, or any voice at all. So they frequently reflect a deficit-based lens. They overlook systemic inequities and intergenerational trauma. The current learning support models are predominantly monocultural and Western biomedical. So there's a lack of integration of mātauranga Māori, kaupapa Māori practices and Māori leadership within policy and governance structures. One of the stories that I was told was of a speech language therapist who refused to work with a child in a kura kaupapa because she was speaking Māori, and so they had to train the teacher aide to work with the child so that she got the SRT support because she spoke Māori. So current approaches diminish rather than uphold the mana and cultural identity of tamariki Māori. We need authentic inclusion that requires relationships grounded in whanaungatanga, whakapapa and holistic wellbeing. And one of the things that we also looked at was the intersection of language acquisition and learning support needs. And we found that multilingual and bilingual students' language skills are often viewed as barriers rather than strengths. Internationally, we know that as an English language learner, if you're a second language learner and English is your second language, you're seen as an emergent bilingual. Here in New Zealand, that's seen as a problem that needs to be addressed. So rather than valuing and affirming cultural and linguistic assets as those core educational practices, we are seeing it as a deficit. So to truly honour Te Tiriti o Waitangi, learning support must shift from deficit-based monocultural frameworks towards mana-enhancing, culturally responsive models, authentically co-designed with Māori. The third thing that came through was teacher preparation gaps. This was really something that came through, particularly related to our initial teacher education programs and the under-preparation we have for our beginning teachers coming into the workforce. It's still seen as an add-on, a bolt-on to the basic training. And I do think that really people don't understand that once upon a time as a teacher, certainly when I trained, you may have had 1 or 2 children in your lifetime or across several years where you met and they had additional needs and you got support for them. Our teachers have 4, 5, 6 in every classroom now. It is the norm, and yet our teachers are not being prepared for that. So our graduates frequently lack essential knowledge and practical skills for supporting neurodivergent students, learners impacted by trauma, or those requiring differentiated learning approaches. I'm not seeing differentiation done well in classrooms at all, and that is simply because teachers do not have the support to be able to do that. We have inclusive education content that's often delivered inconsistently. It's seen as an elective. It's on the peripheral rather than a core skill that we need to have. And there's also the variability between teacher education providers as well. So it results in uneven preparedness among new teachers. Our graduating teachers have had minimal direct experience with high needs learners during their practicums. One of the special school principals that I interviewed said it would be great if we had student teachers come into our school. And it was a requirement that they spend time in a special school and worked with children with high needs. That lack of exposure leads to low confidence, poor preparation, and a reliance on whānau or support staff to guide practice. So the system continues to marginalise rather than embed inclusive teaching as a core professional identity. The next thing, a neglect of learners with complex needs, and these are complex and compounding needs. So the current system really struggles at the moment to significantly support learners whose educational, emotional, behavioural and health needs intersect and compound. Schools face overwhelming bureaucratic barriers, rigid eligibility criteria, and extensive waiting lists, delaying crucial early interventions. These are children that for some reason don't fit in one box, and they don't fit in that box, and they don't fit in that box, and so they just are in this kind of no man's land. Insufficient resources to guarantee safety and appropriate care forcing schools and whānau into impossible decisions. A principal that shared with me that she had a boy who was non-verbal autistic, who had a desire to eat everyone else's food and get into the rubbish bin, and also happened to have an anaphylaxis allergy. And so if he didn't have a full-time teacher aide watching him, he ran the risk of having an anaphylactic reaction, and she was genuinely concerned he would die in her care if they didn't have that full-time watch on him. So because of that, learners are often frequently excluded or isolated due to those lack of appropriate supports. This child can't be left to play in the playground with his peers or be around his peers. If there's no support, he has to stay with someone rather than be with kids. And that leaves families navigating complex, insufficient support systems alone, exacerbating their stress and that marginalisation. And then our educators struggle to manage really critical situations, compromising their ability to effectively teach and care for all students in their care. These are some students who will need toileting, who will need feeding, and teachers certainly don't have the support to manage that in their school day. So schools must resort to short-term fixes rather than comprehensive, sustainable solutions. So again, without structural reform, prioritising proactive, wraparound support, learners with the most complex needs will continue to face exclusion and inequity within education. Then we get to overwhelm and burnout among educators. It's really interesting. I got a message this morning from a good friend of mine who's a principal in Hawke's Bay, and she was aware of this report coming out, and she said to me, I just am so over being in education right now. She's finding it so hard, and she's a brilliant, brilliant principal. So our educators are consistently reporting exhaustion, overwhelm and chronic stress due to unrealistic workloads and inadequate system support. Our teachers work beyond reasonable hours, and their well-being and their families' well-beings are severely compromised. Our schools face increasing complexity in accounting responsibilities, but that resourcing does not match that demand. We're getting high turnover in the sector, particularly in high needs contexts. And that further destabilises our really vulnerable schools already. And then those schools, especially high equity index schools and rural schools, are struggling to attract and retain qualified teachers and support staff. There's competition for better resourced schools, which exacerbates that recruitment challenge and equity. And then we've got disillusionment within our education system. We get that shutdown from teachers that just becomes too much. And we're not getting a level of morale right now that we need from our sector. So morale declining as genuine, innovative efforts in schools is overlooked and undermined. The next thing, policy disconnect and misalignment. This was something that came through quite clearly. And surprisingly, I did not have my attendance hat on when I was doing this, and attendance came up as one of the themes. The pressure that many of our schools face on the current reporting requirements for attendance when we're dealing with children and their whānau that are managing complex issues that are not just simply unjustified. One teacher was sharing that a little boy was dealing with his mother who was dying of breast cancer, and he did not want to come to school, but they couldn't say that's unjustified because he's not technically sick, and yet quite rightly he wants to be at home with his mum. So those centralised policies ignore the complex realities faced by schools serving high needs communities. Compliance-driven frameworks undermine relational, flexible and responsive practices essential for learner engagement. As I said, national attendance policies label that unjustified. They overlook the context of trauma, grief and instability. Rigid policies damage the vital relationships between schools, students and whānau. Many principals have said to me, how can I tell that family that this is unjustified when what they're dealing with at the moment, this is the least of their concerns. We also have strict curricular expectations, which are limiting flexibility to adopt context-sensitive, culturally sustaining and trauma-informed educational approaches. National policies will inadvertently suppress local innovation and creative pedagogical responses. So for education policies to be effective, in supporting all learners, they must be developed and implemented with genuine sensitivity to local contexts, realities and relationships, prioritising flexibility and professional judgment over rigid compliance. And following on from that, we get to our narrowed educational purpose. The narrow focus on literacy and numeracy is having a significant impact on our students with learning needs. Because we're emphasising foundational skills, it is at the expense of broader educational goals. Our educators are feeling constrained by overly prescriptive curricula. It's limiting their ability to address holistic student needs. The policies that prioritise these narrow defined academic outcomes neglect critical social, emotional, cultural and relational factors that are essential to student engagement. So well-being, relationships and belonging are fundamental to a meaningful educational progression, especially during times of adversity. We need authentic educational success, which then requires flexible, cultural sustaining and trauma-informed methods, not just standardised academic interventions. Narrow metrics fail to capture meaningful educational growth and discourage innovative teaching practices. When we have a centralised curriculum policy, it assumes all learners start from equal positions, and it ignores significant inequities and historical gaps in educational access. And then on top of that, we have unrealistic expectations that are placed upon schools and learners, which then further marginalises and disengages both students and whānau. So we need a balanced approach that at the heart of it values relational wellbeing, cultural responsiveness and holistic learner development alongside those foundational skills. As the principal said though, it's not about pulling one lever like funding or training, it's a paradigm shift. We can't pull from one and inject in another, because when we do that, we lose something over here and we start to get out of balance. And really, we're in the position we're in because we've been doing that for so long. And the system is now telling us that that just doesn't work anymore. So, how do we move forward from this and not leave it in a place of absolute depression? We need some learning support through an equity lens, and the report itself challenges anyone in policy making, in any decision that you make around learning support in education, to review those policy decisions through an equity lens, to ask questions of the policy to ensure that it meets these key areas. So first of all, equity of access and resourcing. Will this policy ensure that high needs schools and communities receive the support they require? And does it address systemic barriers faced by Māori, Pacifica, neurodiverse and disabled learners? So that's the first lens that we would want to critically analyse any policy on. The second one is human resource capacity. Does it stabilise the workforce by creating secure, sustainable roles? And will it move the system from reactive to proactive? The third question, whānau partnership and cultural responsivity. Is Te Tiriti o Waitangi embedded, not tokenised? Does it enable localised, culturally grounded decision making? Number 4, flexibility and professional judgment. Does it allow educators to adapt based on learner context or impose rigid standardisation? Are teachers trusted as professionals? Number 5, student dignity and belonging. Will this policy enhance students' mana, sense of agency and belonging? Does it reduce stigma, exclusion and deficit framing? True reform requires policy that is brave, equity-led and co-designed with those closest to the work. Use this lens to ensure decisions foster inclusion, justice and long-term change, not just technical compliance. So, what needs to happen now? Well, we need these key areas looked at. First of all, we need to prioritise learning support as core infrastructure. It can't be a bolt-on anymore. It can't be the nice to have when we've got everything else done. It can't be something that is not recognised as foundational to educational success for all mokopuna, not just our ones with learning needs, but every child in our class. We need to stabilise and strengthen the workforce. We need investment in secure, career-sustaining roles for teacher aides and learning support staff, we need access to specialist services, our psychologists, our SLTs, our OTs, and we need to reduce wait time. And the NZEI Kia Mahi Kotahi report, as proposed by the NZEI, is fabulous in terms of the National Workforce Development Plan. The third area there is embed inclusive practice in initial teacher education. We need inclusive education as a core, non-negotiable component of every teacher's training. They need practical, real-world exposure to neurodiversity, to trauma-informed practice and culturally sustaining approaches. And then we have reform funding models for flexibility and equity. Let's take a look at how the money is used, how it's accessed, who it's given to, and move away from rigid, student-tied funding to predictable, needs-responsive resourcing. We need to enable schools to plan proactively and avoid being stuck in constant crisis management. We need to honour Te Tiriti o Waitangi. We need to embed kaupapa Māori approaches across all levels of learning support. We need to shift from a deficit-based to mana-enhancing practice in policy, pedagogy and delivery, and we need to support bilingual and multilingual learners as assets, not problems. And finally, we need to align policy with reality. Replace one-size-fits-all accountability with context-responsive relational frameworks. We balance the focus on foundational skills, which are important, with whole child development and wellbeing. We have the evidence, we have the voices in this report. What we need now is a brave system-level action that centres dignity, justice and equity for every learner, every day. So, fund people, not paperwork. We need a national plan. We need to end the piecemeal patchwork approach and design for scale and equity. We need to embed trauma-informed, culturally sustaining practice so that we centre learning support in the neuroscience, wellbeing and cultural identity of our children and recognise the whole child, not just their learning outcomes. We need to honour equity, not just equality. Learners need different supports to achieve fair outcomes. Equity requires us to redistribute power, not just resources. And most of all, we need policymakers to walk in the teacher's shoes. We need policymakers to engage directly with those that have lived experiences. We need them to listen to whānau, to educators and mokopuna navigating broken systems daily. The vision is already there. We've had 25 years of reviews, we've had multiple calls for action. The voices of those who know the system best are the ones that need to be listened to. And the question is not what needs doing, but whether we have the courage to lead differently. So we know what works. The system is at a tipping point, and it's not about marginal reform. We can't have tutuing anymore. We need leadership that has moral courage, so that all our children deserve the best and have access to the best in their time at school. We don't need more diagnosis, we need that decisive change. So learning support must no longer be a peripheral function, it is central to any vision of equity, excellence and belonging. Thank you everyone.
Thank you, Sarah, ngā mihi mai oha, for your, as always, excellent capture of a wide range of voices, your depth of analysis, clarity of key themes, and essential recommendations for our paradigm shift. It is now my pleasure to invite Titi Miller, Principal of Arakura School in Wainuiomata, to share her experience as well as some insights from the recently launched Learning Support Workforce Report, Kia Mahi Kotahi, Working Together. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Tūte Mila tōku ingoa, ko te tumuake o Arakura School ki Te Awa Kairangi ki tai home. I just want to start first by saying thank you, Sarah. You were right, it was a very depressing report. But what you did was you spoke for the education sector. You told the story of our experiences day in, day out, and the real challenges that everyone is having, and I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that you put voice and mana to the things that we've been saying for a very, very long time. We always knew as educators that the situation was difficult, that it was challenging and that it was bad. And what you've confirmed is that it's just absolutely appalling, the state of learning support. And I'm grateful that we have this opportunity to have this kōrero and to launch your work so that we can begin to formulate a solution together. So I just want to start by saying, that dark week for all women of Aotearoa. Well, during that time, there was a little celebration happening in my school in Wainuiomata for one of our families, and it's this wee boy that I kind of want to focus my kōrero on. So during that dark week for women in Aotearoa, we celebrated the success of an OARS application for one of our tamariki. It took 4 years to get this for him. And so, all of us were in a huddle in the staff room, the whānau, the kaiako, teacher aide and speech language therapist who had all contributed to the SOARS application. And everyone was so overcome with emotions. And it's because the process itself is not only a really long journey, but it's utterly demoralising because of the narrow lens that it takes on the child. As Sarah said, that piece about honouring Te Tiriti o Waitangi, that's about potential, that's about the strength, the talents of that child. But always, as you know, highlights the complete opposite. The highest needs review that was conducted by the previous government identified that for every 7 students receiving some form of learning support, which our mokopuna is one of them now, there are another 3 that remain with unmet needs. It's almost like lotto, isn't it? The haves and the have-nots, except that it's not money that's being gambled, it's the lives of our mokopuna. So for this particular wee man at my school, he will now get about 12 hours of support each week because of his successful OARS application. But at my school, of 70%, with additional learning needs, we have several more with high and complex needs that we know will never get that same funding because they don't meet the narrow criteria of OARS. So what choice do we have? We have no choice. We have to keep doing what we do, and that is to buffer the inadequacy of the system to ensure that all of our children that choose Arakura School as their school get the support that they need at whatever cost. OARS itself isn't a gold star either, by the way. 12 hours is not enough for this mokopuna. He needs full-time support. And when we do get funding, it's paid out less than the minimum wage. So on top of topping up the actual hours our tamariki need, we are also topping up the difference in the wage rate. Because why? We value the experience and the expertise of all of our support staff, our learning assistants in the classroom. So for me as tūwaki, it makes a real nightmare of a job managing limited resources. But when I think about the lives of our tamariki with disabilities that are neurodiverse, that are affected by trauma, when we think about their right to quality public education alongside their neurodiverse peers, the choice is simple. And so I, like Linda's school, we heavily are invested in learning support so that we have a teacher aide in every classroom. Some of our classes has 2. We've developed a learning support hub where we have 2 specialist learning assistants delivering a program specifically for our autistic children to complement what they have in the classroom. And so this year we budgeted for the equivalent of 90% of our operations grant. Last year was a particularly bad year. We got up to 101%, the equivalent of 101% of our operations grant. And I know that I have to figure out some way to make things work, because you can't wash out autism from a child. You can't wash out ADHD. Those needs are still going to be there next year, and I have to figure out a way to make that happen. And it isn't okay that that pressure is left on us when we as a nation believe in quality public education for all. We have to, as Sarah said, look at learning support as a key infrastructure that enables all learners to succeed. The fight for equity in education is a very real one, and right now it feels like we're losing, because the situation for many is at breaking point. This report here that NZEI has developed, Kia Mahi Putahi, working together, I am extremely proud of this learning support workforce plan. This is based on all the recent reviews, government reviews into learning support, but also the collective experience and wisdom of our NZEI Te Reo members and supporters from the disability sector. What the plan calls for is an investment of $2.5 billion over 5 years. That's just to get us going. That's to begin the transformation to a more inclusive education system, one that is child-centred, rights-based, strengths-based, and respects and protects the mana of all our tamariki. The workforce plan contains the things that we know make a difference: teacher aides in every classroom, dedicated professional development available to the school to embed the school-wide systems that are necessary to ensure the success of all. This piecemeal kind of approach to PRD doesn't work. We have, at my school, have done so much work around trauma, understanding autism. We've worked really closely with our friends at Autism New Zealand, as well as our local ministry office, the psychologists, speech and language therapists. And what we've done is created a shared language and understanding and professional practice of how to support our tamariki. That is the kind of long-term PRD kind of approach that actually works, because it is for not just our kaiako, it includes all of our kaya whena tautoko, including the caretaker. He's in there as well, learning about trauma and autism, but also with our whānau. So we've been able to create a network for our parents with children with autism, because supporting them is supporting our children. My school is one of the failing schools in terms of attendance, and we know why. You know, our parents, the challenges that they have around food, you know, for the autistic children, around feeding, around self-care when water is a sensory trigger for them, around sleep. These are massive hurdles. These are not parents who don't care about education. These are parents who have a battle day in, day out. We know that. My office manager wants me to say that there needs to be an attendance code called ND for neurodiverse. That is a justified absence. If somebody could take that to someone, that would be great. So the inconsistent funding is a massive problem. We can't build a strong, committed, capable workforce when 54% of teacher aides are employed on insecure fixed-term contracts. right? Just can't, it doesn't work. So at my school, we focus on what our children need. We only have 6 schools. We're a smallish school. We have 6 classrooms, but we have 11 support staff. We have 11 teacher aides, all on permanent contracts, and in whom we invest heavily in PRD for them because they are so critical to the overall support for our children. Can I afford it? No, I can't. No, I can't. And it's a big problem. I'm going off track, so keep adding to my speech. I don't know why. It's critical that we have access to early intervention, so ensuring we invest in specialist staffing and services means tamariki are not waiting for 18 months for specialist assessments. You know, we had a really dire situation about this time last year, and we made a referral to severe behaviour for urgent support. We did not get a psychologist until last week. And all of that time, over 12 months, we've just had to try and support this wee child. He's only 5, just started school. And work with the whānau to do what we can. But it isn't okay, is it? We had children waiting for support from our health system. They're waiting anything from 18 months to 24 months before they're even seen for an initial meeting. So Kia Mahi Kotahi is an achievable learning support workforce plan, the plan developed by NZEI. What it does need is a government that is courageous enough to do what's right. There has to be new investment. Taking from one part of the sector to prop up the other will never work. And right now we've got a whole lot of our colleagues who are in kahuiako or are resource teachers of literacy and resource teachers of Māori. We don't know if their roles are still going to remain or whether they will be the cost to prop up other bits that the government will announce on budget day. Aotearoa New Zealand was once held high internationally as the pinnacle of quality public education. We can be that again. I don't think we're that anymore, but we can be that again when all the learning support needs of our young people are met, because the success of our tamariki and learning support means the success of all of our tamariki. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you, Tute. I know I had a visceral reaction to your stories, brought a tear, as I'm sure other educators in the room experienced as well. But as one of my mentors, Dr. Bruce Perry, says, stories change systems. Stories change people and people change systems. So kia ora. So as we come towards our close, again, thanks so much to Sarah, to Tute, to Matua Lawrence, Jack, and parliamentary staff for today. Ngā mihi mai o a kia koutou. When we finish, please join us for some morning tea. Thank you to Matua Lawrence and the team. And we'll have a moment to have a chat. If you want to chat with any of the speakers or with one another, please do. So to close, I would just like to say that this report is our call to action. Please share it widely, either the paper copy or the electronic copy, which will be available very shortly, if not already. Because before we can teach the basics brilliantly, we must attend to the basics brilliantly. The basics of full access to and engagement in schooling and education in general for all. The basics of the human right for students and staff to feel safe and be safe at school. The basics of well-regulated and well-integrated brains. The basics of those fundamental human needs of food, shelter, sleep and love. If we can get learning support right, we truly would be world leading. But it will take most probably a bipartisan government approach, with learning support as a priority area. If we get learning support right, we can transform not just educational outcomes for Aotearoa, but health, social and economic outcomes. Kia ora, and we'll finish with a karakia, but I may invite Mark to lead that. Kia ora, everybody.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Linda. So ko au te tumaki o te kuro Wearable ki Pōneke ko Mark Potter tōku ingoa. So I'm Mark Potter. I am principal of Wearable School. Wasn't quite expecting to be called up for the karakia, but we did a lot of technology to do for us. I'd just like to call out Tēnā koe ki Lawrence. Thank you so much for the support that the Greens have done for this, as well as the Labour Party too is very much behind us as well. And thank you to the organisations, the educators here, the people who aren't educators but have a passion for education who are here. We have been waiting for decades, and this report is absolutely beautiful. I've been a principal for over 30 years now, and I can't remember when I didn't struggle to get some support for the children in my school. And you talk about teaching basis brilliantly. How about we get into funding brilliantly? I'd also like to thank all those in the Aotearoa Education Collective who've been working behind the scenes to bring this forward, because what the ABC is asking for is a genuine conversation around education, and then a genuine plan to develop the education system that this country claims it wants to have. That's all we're asking for. So on that note, I'll close this with karakia. Inui tātou. Ke whakieria te tau. Ka waitea ai te ara. Ke tūriki whakataha ai. Ke tūriki whakataha ai. Huie,
Tai te.
Kia ora. And as Linda said, please join us for a couple of the back. There's some refreshments there. We can do karakia kai down there. Kia ora.